The HOA board laughed when they saw the concrete flood wall rising along the edge of my property. They called it ugly, paranoid, and completely unnecessary. According to them, the neighborhood had perfect drainage, and they treated my warnings like some ridiculous overreaction from a homeowner who cared too much about weather reports. Bro, the arrogance in situations like this always blows my mind. People ignore every warning sign until reality crashes straight through their front door. What made this situation even crazier was the fact that I wasn't guessing. I had engineering reports, county flood maps, and years of storm data proving the danger was real. But the HOA didn't care about facts. They cared about appearances, property values, and control. And the moment they threatened to fine me over the wall, I realized this wasn't just about flooding anymore. This had turned into a power game. What they didn't know was that within hours, the sky would open up, the drainage system would fail, and their entire neighborhood would begin sinking under rushing brown water, and suddenly, the wall they mocked would become the only thing standing between safety and disaster. 2. I had lived in the neighborhood for almost 6 years, and during that entire time, I noticed one problem that nobody else seemed willing to talk about. The subdivision sat in a shallow basin between two elevated hillsides, and every major storm pushed runoff directly toward the homes. Most people ignored it because the developers had installed decorative drainage canals and retention ponds that looked convincing enough during normal weather, but after working for years in commercial construction, I knew cosmetic infrastructure when I saw it. The entire system was undersized. One truly severe storm would overload everything in less than an hour. That realization stuck in my head every rainy season, especially after small floods already started appearing in some backyards. But the HOA board kept dismissing every concern. They spend more money on landscaping signs and gate decorations than actual flood prevention. That's exactly how people act in real life. They care more about appearances than preparation, until disaster finally humiliates them publicly. Things escalated after the county released updated floodplain projections showing increased runoff risks for our area. I attended an HOA meeting and calmly presented the report along with recommendations from a civil engineer I hired myself. The engineer suggested reinforcing my property line because my lot sat directly at the lowest point near the neighborhood entrance. If the main drainage trench overflowed, the water would hit my property first, before spreading toward the center of the subdivision. I wasn't trying to create problems, I was trying to prevent one, but the board reacted like I had insulted them personally. The HOA president rolled her eyes while another board member claimed I was spreading panic. Bro, hearing that kind of ignorance from adults who controlled neighborhood decisions was honestly unbelievable. 3. Instead of discussing solutions, they immediately focused on one thing: my plan to build a reinforced flood wall. The wall itself wasn't massive or outrageous. It was a professionally designed concrete barrier disguised with stone finishing and landscaping. It matched the neighborhood aesthetic better than half the random decorative projects approved by the HOA over the years. But because I built it without waiting for months of committee approvals, the board completely lost their minds. They started sending violation letters and claiming the structure damaged the community. Harmony and obstructed visual continuity. Just hearing phrases like that during an actual flood risk discussion felt insane. Meanwhile, meteorologists were already warning about a historic storm system approaching the region. Local news stations talked about possible flash flooding for nearly a week straight, but the HOA remained obsessed with appearances. The harassment got worse every day. They threatened fines. They sent inspectors to photograph my property. One board member even walked around taking measurements like they were preparing for a lawsuit. And the craziest part? Multiple neighbors privately admitted they were worried about flooding, too, but nobody wanted to publicly oppose the HOA because the board had a reputation for targeting residents who challenged them. That kind of small-town power obsession always creates chaos. Eventually, people stay quiet until consequences become unavoidable. As the storm approached, the atmosphere in the neighborhood started changing. The air felt heavy. Rain clouds sat over the hills for days. Drainage ditches already looked near capacity before the worst. Weather even arrived. I reinforced every section of my property, checked my generators, moved valuables to higher floors, and installed additional pumps near the wall. 4. Meanwhile, the HOA sent me one final notice demanding immediate removal of the structure within 10 days or face legal action. 10 days? Bro, they were threatening lawsuits while emergency weather alerts were literally flashing across everyone's phones. And then the storm finally arrived. And within the first hour, everything started collapsing exactly the way I warned them it would. 5. The rain didn't fall normally. It slammed into the neighborhood like an endless wall of water. Streets disappeared beneath rushing currents within minutes, and the decorative drainage ponds overflowed. Almost immediately, I watched from my second-floor window as muddy water blasted through the main canal system faster than anything I had ever seen before. The retention basin near the entrance completely failed, sending a surge directly toward the center of the subdivision, and suddenly panic spread everywhere. Neighbors started scrambling to move vehicles onto sidewalks and driveways. Garbage bins floated down the streets like boats. Water poured over curbs and swallowed lawns. Bro, this part genuinely felt unreal. Everything the HOA promised would never happen was unfolding in real time right in front of them. The worst part was watching the board members' homes take the first major hits because most of them lived in the lowest central section of the neighborhood where runoff naturally collected. Meanwhile, my flood wall held perfectly. The reinforced barrier redirected massive amounts of water away from my house exactly as designed. The pumps pushed overflow safely into the emergency runoff trench behind my property. While neighboring yards turned into swamps, my home stayed protected, and people noticed immediately. Some neighbors even ran through the storm toward my property because my driveway had become one of the few safe elevated areas left in the subdivision. Then came the moment nobody expected. The main HOA drainage gate collapsed. A huge surge of brown floodwater exploded through the neighborhood streets and rushed directly toward the homes of several board members. Within seconds, garages started filling. Front doors leaked. Basement windows shattered under pressure. And hearing later how quickly water entered those homes honestly blew my mind. Years of ignoring infrastructure problems had finally caught up with them all at once. 6. And suddenly, the flood wall they mocked stopped looking so funny. The most unbelievable part happened during the peak of the storm. Several HOA board members actually showed up outside my property in the middle of the flooding because they wanted access behind the wall where the ground remained stable. Just days earlier, these same people threatened legal action over the structure. Now they were desperately trying to shelter equipment, vehicles, and valuables near the very barrier they called an utter embarrassment to the community. That kind of instant hypocrisy is absolutely incredible to watch in real life. Emergency crews eventually arrived, but the roads were already heavily damaged. Water kept rising through large sections of the subdivision while my property stayed protected behind the reinforced system. The HOA tried to stop. County engineers later confirmed exactly what I had warned about for years. The neighborhood drainage infrastructure was critically undersized and poorly maintained. The failed retention systems created a bottleneck that redirected enormous amounts of runoff directly into residential areas. In simple terms, the entire disaster was preventable. And then came the ultimate karma moment. The HOA president's home suffered some of the worst flood damage in the entire neighborhood. Water destroyed flooring, electrical systems, furniture, and storage rooms within hours. Multiple board members faced massive repair costs while insurance companies began investigating whether negligence played a role in the disaster. Bro, hearing all of that after the way they treated everyone was honestly insane. The same people obsessed with enforcing cosmetic rules suddenly had to explain why they ignored repeated flood warnings and engineering reports. 7. But the real revenge wasn't screaming or celebrating. It was the fact that my preparation worked perfectly while their arrogance collapsed in front of the entire neighborhood. Residents who once stayed quiet started openly criticizing the HOA. Leadership, people demanded resignations. Emergency meetings turned chaotic. And the flood wall that supposedly hurt property values ended up becoming the only successful flood protection structure in the entire subdivision. That was incredible to witness. In the months after the flood, the neighborhood completely changed. Several HOA board members resigned under pressure while insurance investigations and county inspections exposed years of ignored maintenance problems. New leadership eventually approved major drainage upgrades throughout the subdivision, including reinforced runoff channels and expanded retention systems that should have existed from the beginning. Ironically, my flood wall became the model engineer's reference during redesign discussions. The same structure once labeled an eyesore was now treated like the smartest decision anyone in the neighborhood had made. Bro, situations like this always prove one thing. Reality eventually destroys arrogance. No amount of HOA authority can overpower physics, weather, or common sense forever. 7. But the real revenge wasn't screaming or celebrating. It was the fact that my preparation worked perfectly while their arrogance collapsed in front of the entire neighborhood. Residents who once stayed quiet started openly criticizing the HOA. Leadership, people demanded resignations, emergency meetings turned chaotic, and the flood wall that supposedly hurt property values ended up becoming the only successful flood protection structure in the entire subdivision. That was incredible to witness. In the months after the flood, the neighborhood completely changed. Several HOA board members resigned under pressure while insurance investigations and county inspections exposed years of ignored maintenance problems. New leadership eventually approved major drainage upgrades throughout the subdivision, including reinforced runoff channels and expanded retention systems that should have existed from the beginning. Ironically, my flood wall became the model engineer's reference during redesign discussions. The same structure once labeled an eyesore was now treated like the smartest decision anyone in the neighborhood had made. Bro, situations like this always prove one thing. Reality eventually destroys arrogance. No amount of HOA authority can overpower physics, weather, or common sense forever. 8. Honestly, this story perfectly shows why power-tripping HOA boards create disasters for entire communities. Some people become so obsessed with rules, appearances, and control that they stop listening to actual expertise. And that's exactly how preventable problems turn into massive catastrophes. And let's be real here. The homeowner wasn't trying to win against the HOA, he was trying to protect his property using logic and preparation. The revenge only happened because the board ignored every warning until consequences became unavoidable. Bro, hearing stories like this genuinely blows my mind because people really act this way in real life. But in the end, preparation beat ego, and karma arrived faster than anyone expected.